We are honored to have Dr. Richard Haas, who is the president of the Nonpartisan Council on Foreign Relations, and he has held this position for the past 17 years. Before taking over the council's leadership, he served as the chair for the multi-party negotiations in Northern Ireland. For his efforts, he received the Tipperary International Peace Award. From 2001 to 2003, he served as the director of the State Department's policy planning staff under Secretary of State Colin Powell. He also served as the special assistant and senior Middle East director to President George H.W. Bush. Previously, he served in both the State and Defense Departments and as a U.S. Senate legislative aide. Dr. Haas has been awarded the Presidential Citizen Medal for his leadership and policy contributions to Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Dr. Haas is a Rhodes Scholar and holds master's and doctorate's degrees from Oxford University. He was also a member of the faculty of Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and Hamilton College. In his spare time, he has authored and edited 14 books on foreign policy and one on management. As of recently, his book titled The World, A Brief Introduction, is a New York Times bestseller, ranked number 10 on the nonfiction list and 15 on the combined print and ebook list. He is uniquely qualified to address how events impact and countries tackle the world's most vexing issues, having studied, wrote, taught, and served in foreign policy positions throughout his impressive professional career. Richard, it's my honor to welcome you to the show. We are delighted to have you as part of our Day 2 annual Global Innovation 2030 Digital Summit and cannot wait to hear the key insights you bring.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that overly generous introduction.
Well, absolutely. You certainly deserve it. And congratulations on your book reaching the New York Times bestselling list. That's quite the achievement.
Well, thank you for that as well.
Absolutely. Well, to jump right into current global circumstances, most Americans, and I would suspect people all over the world, feel as though the world has just shut down the past 4 to 5 months. We're hunkered down in our homes with little interaction with others. As the world starts to open up, Richard, what do you see on a global scene will be the most significant changes that COVID-19 has brought about?
Well, a couple of points to make, John. One is even though we're all focused, obviously, on the pandemic, other things haven't stopped. There's no pause button in history. So other things have been going on. Just in the last few days, obviously, we've seen the events in Hong Kong, or more quietly, something like climate change simply continues to occur, or North Korea continues to enhance its nuclear and missile capabilities. The Russians are still parked in Ukraine. So there's that reality. In terms of how things are going to open up and what happens, so much depends upon what do we mean by opening up. I call where we are now, we're in a situation of a trans-pandemic world. We're amidst it. I don't know exactly when we get to a post-pandemic world. It'll depend in part upon the virus, in part about what happens on the medical front, in part about how different societies react or handle or contend with this virus. Already, we've seen extraordinary variation within countries and from country to country. So again, it's hard to give you a precise prediction about anything. I would just say, though, and I've argued this in print in our magazine and Foreign Affairs, that a lot of the trends that we saw in place before any of us ever heard of COVID-19, my own sense is a lot of those trends will be visible, they will be recognizable. They may, though, have intensified. History may, because of this virus, find itself accelerating.
Yeah, absolutely. We are certainly in unprecedented times. And, speaking of Hong Kong and China in particular, it is often heard that we're headed into a new Cold War, this time with China, in small part brought on by the genesis of COVID in Wuhan. So do you believe that we are headed into a new Cold War? And if so, what will that mean for the U.S. going forward?
Well, I don't think we're there yet, and nothing's inevitable in history. History is the result of what people decide, what people do. But I think it's also realistic to acknowledge that U.S.-Chinese relations were deteriorating before the pandemic hit, and as a result of the pandemic, they are somewhat worse. But this is a relationship that's been troubled for some time. Think about it, the United States and China really came together only because they both were opposed to the Soviet Union. Then when the Cold War ended, they stayed somewhat close because of their trade and investment. But what's happened in recent decades is trade, rather than being a source of glue, has increasingly become a source of friction between the United States and China. So the relationship lost its foundation. And then on top of that, we have our political differences, given I mentioned Hong Kong, given the Chinese repression of the Uyghur Muslim minority in its country. We have differences over Chinese strategic behavior, particularly in the South China Sea. We have a wide range of economic concerns about what's going on. China, for its part, has problems with certain things that we are doing. So, as I said, this is a relationship that hasn't quite found its rationale, hasn't found its foundation. I would say the stakes are enormous. This is probably or definitely the single most important bilateral relationship in the world. And as goes the United States and China, so will go a lot of history. I've argued against a Cold War if it can be avoided. I don't think China should be at the center of American foreign policy if we can help it. There's any number of reasons. I think it exaggerates China's capabilities and its aims. It is not, I would argue, the Soviet Union during the Cold War. I think it underestimates China's internal vulnerabilities. We can discuss those if you like. Also, I want to be able to cooperate with China where we can, say against climate change, say against a future pandemic, say to what North Korea does. So I don't want to have a one-dimensional confrontational relationship if I can avoid it.
No, absolutely. And you're right. I think cooperation with China, particularly when it comes to climate change and, for instance, the United Nations 17 Sustainable Goals is absolutely essential. And so that really segues nicely that, our viewership may be aware, but IdeaGen is really focused on furthering those 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so, you talked a little bit about it, but with the world's two superpowers, China and the US kind of having these tensions and squaring off recently, are we likely to see regression on achieving these goals? And also, what role does globalization play? Is it inevitable? And has COVID changed the way that we look going forward?
There was a couple of questions packed in there. Look, we could find some regression on these goals. Clearly, the goal of global public health, which I think was the third goal, if I remember the SDGs, it's been a bad time for that, even though some of the measures in advance of the pandemic were obviously moving in the right direction. There's been real progress in the world in disease eradication, lowering rates of maternal and infant mortality. But already there were massive problems on what are called NCDs, non-communicable diseases. And I think one of the problems, quite honestly, with global health policy and even with the SDGs is they don't place nearly enough emphasis on things like diabetes, cancer, goals that are often associated with lifestyle, drug abuse, alcoholism, coronary disease, so things associated also with smoking. So that problem was enormous and the world wasn't doing enough. Now, obviously, on top of that, we've got this new infectious disease, COVID-19. So in the area of global public health, shall we say, the plate is full, and we'll see how well we deal with it. But the knock-on effects are going to be, obviously extraordinarily problematic. And the optimists viewing this might say, well, hopefully this will wake people up and we'll all start cooperating more. Well, maybe, but maybe not. So far, at least, we haven't seen much in the way of international cooperation. Instead, we're seeing countries turn more inward. There's a sense that countries have to look after themselves. Take the United States, for example. We've lost over 100,000 lives. 40 million people are now unemployed. Trillions of dollars of wealth have been lost. So it's going to be hard to persuade a lot of Americans that this is a moment we should be focused on the world, even if one of the basic, if not the basic lesson of the pandemic is that, like it or not, what happens in the world matters. In this case, what began in Wuhan, China, clearly didn't stay in Wuhan, China. And that, to me, is what globalization is all about. To me, globalization is a reality. It's about these flows of everything from computer viruses to real viruses, to people, to guns, to drugs, to dollars, to emails, to carbon dioxide, to you name it. And these flows are in enormous velocity, great speed, enormous volume, and they don't, in most cases, respect borders. And that, to me, is the reality of our time. How you respond to globalization, how you respond to each one of these flows, well, that's a matter of foreign policy or domestic policy. But I do think what distinguishes the 21st century and this era of history from all that came before us is globalization. We have all the old challenges. And, we just talked about China, rising China, whether the United States and China can avoid a Cold War. That's the familiar stuff of history. What's new about this era is things like climate change, things like pandemics, things like global terrorism, the reality of cyberspace, the reality of proliferation. It's these global challenges to order and to national and individual well-being that is the qualitatively different characteristic of this era.
Yeah, no, I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. And, you have an entire chapter in your book dedicated to climate change. And I certainly hope that coming out of this COVID crisis, that we do see cooperation and we do see people coming together, unifying for a cause, seeing that, we've seen small spurts of the environment semi-bouncing back, but that really doesn't seem to be long-term for the time being. And so I absolutely agree with you. And so moving on here, having talked about the U.S.-China dynamic.
John, can I just interrupt for a second?
Absolutely.
30 seconds on climate change.
Sure.
We have seen some temporary improvements in the air in many countries, but that's really because of the economic recession or depression caused by the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
That's temporary. And as people go back to work, and we all hope that people can go back to work, unless there's a fundamental change in behavior or in the use of fuels, any improvement in the air and the atmosphere is going to be temporary. So we haven't seen yet any fundamental changes in climate policy. So let's just be realistic. The
Sure.
challenge is there. I think there's an opportunity if we choose it. A lot of money is going to be dispensed by government to help businesses get back on their feet. One of the questions is, will any of that money be conditioned on businesses adopting more responsible climate-oriented policies? For example, might a government say to an automobile manufacturer, we'll help you, but only if you raise the fuel standards of the cars you're producing? Or might money be given to this or that manufacturing plant, but only if they move away from coal as their principal source of fuel? So I think there could be opportunities here. I'm not sure they will be taken, though, because, again, the priority will be getting people back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Nations will be looking at their own economic revival. And again, it makes the basic point that crises are potential opportunities, but only if that potential is seized. Crises can also be wasted. And I think one of the questions going forward is whether we seize the opportunity created by the awful situation we find ourselves in, or whether we squander it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is the big question. We certainly hope that, these opportunities aren't wasted coming out of this, and that the nations of the world do seize it. And so, as I said, moving on, what do you see as Russia's emerging role in the world?
It's hard for me to see much positive. When you look at Russia, when you look at Mr. Putin, this is a fundamentally illiberal society. They have no desire to be a part of the world that the United States and others promoted after World War II, when they were back as the Soviet Union, and after the end of the Cold War. I think Mr. Putin sees the kind of liberal democratic values that the United States has traditionally upheld as a threat to his country, as a threat to his personal rule. And what we see is a consecutive pattern of Russian behavior using the military force in Ukraine, in Georgia, in the Middle East. We see interference with democratic elections in this country and elsewhere through cyberspace. We see tremendous illiberalism at home, the killing of journalists and other imprisonment of activists. So all that I see continuing. Now, Mr. Putin is feeling pressure. Energy prices have gone down considerably.
Mm-hmm.
He and his government have not handled the coronavirus epidemic at all well. So, Russia came into the crisis with a terrible public health system that's having trouble managing all the pressure. But I see no signs of Russian behavior improving. I'll say one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Russia still is the superpower in one area, and that is nuclear weapons. Russia and the United States are different than everybody else there. And the question is, we have an election here, obviously, in November. Well, in February, just a few weeks after whoever wins that election takes up the job of president, whether it's President Trump in a second term or Joe Biden as a new president, they are going to face a situation where the U.S., Russia, the New START agreement, the principal arms control agreement that regulates the long-range nuclear weapons of each side, that agreement is due to expire. And one of the real questions going forward is, can it be extended? And I hope it can, but recent events are not great. We've seen the United States get out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement on allegations that Russia was not complying. And most recently, just days ago, we saw the United States withdraw from the so-called Open Skies Agreement, essentially an arrangement that allows countries to overfly one another so they can see what's going on in certain areas and reassure themselves both what's going on and what's not going on. So for all these reasons, I can't see any reason to be optimistic about the course of U.S.-Russian relations or about Russia's behavior in the world. And as we've seen, for better but more for worse, what Russia does can still matter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we had, talked about it a little bit, but given that competition and the challenges that we face with China and Russia, where do you see, Richard, a few areas of cooperation that we could have to advance technology or the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals or society as a whole?
Let's break it down in two ways. With the United States and Russia, I haven't given up on the possibility of some cooperation on nuclear arms control. I think that's still possible. I haven't given up on the possibility, say, with the United States and China, even Russia, on some cooperation dealing with Afghanistan, with North Korea, with China and the United States, possibly on climate, possibly on global health. So I think there are some areas for possible collaboration. More broadly, a lot of the issues in the SDGs, a lot of those are really national challenges when it comes to things like education and so forth. That's really up to governments, either at the national level or at the local level, to put into place policies. It's not the world, for example, that's going to determine the quality of K through 12 education in the United States. That's for states and localities in the United States to determine. But I think there's a possibility, in the area of public health. We've already talked about it, but I think there's a decent chance that there'll be some impetus to improve global public health, particularly when it comes to dealing with infectious disease. I would think that's one area where there could be global increased collaboration. In other areas, we'll just have to see. If you go through the list of 17 goals, as I said, some are national. Something like climate change, obviously the opportunity is there. Again, whether it will be seized, I think that's where, at best, I'm agnostic. We'll know soon enough. My concern, though, is that there will be an inward-looking focus. There will be a focus on getting people back to work, and there may be the viewpoint, which I think is wrong, but it may hold all the same, that governments don't have the luxury to focus on dealing with some of the issues covered by the SDGs, because they've got to focus on domestic health or on domestic economic recovery.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so now turning gears slightly, as I mentioned, you now are a New York Times bestselling author for your book, The World: A Brief Introduction. I currently have a copy of it and started reading it, and it really is quite fascinating. And I encourage our viewers that this is a must read for anyone of any age, education level out there in general, to really get an introduction to, as you say, the world. So, Richard, that's quite a big topic, and it's a big topic written for a big multi-generational audience. There's a line in your book where you say, quote, "There's no limit to the number of questions that could be raised dealing with the world, for the answers could have profound consequences for our lives." So knowing this and having written or edited 14 other books, how did you decide what is important and what is not important for readers to understand about, as you say, the world?
It was actually the hardest question I had to raise and then try to answer in writing this book. And I walked a lot of laps in Central Park. That's the way I tried to think about it. And what I wanted to do was write a single book, not for people who had dedicated their lives to the study of the world or foreign policy, but for normal people. I mean, what the young man who stimulated the book was a computer sciences major. And he was about to graduate from Stanford and he hadn't had any courses in history, in international relations, in politics, and I worried that, okay, once he backed off from the screen, how is he going to be an informed citizen? How is he going to make good choices in his life? And what I found out is that his situation wasn't unique. You can graduate from most high schools in the country. You can graduate from most colleges and universities in the country and not be exposed to the basics about this world that you're going to enter that will affect your life. And if you're older, if you're the parents or grandparent of a college age student, the same holds for you. You may have never studied it. If you did study it, what you studied is largely obsolete. If you watch the nightly news, you're not going to catch much of it. But all of us need to know about this. You got to need to know about it this November. You're going to want to cast your vote in a way that's mindful of where the candidates stand on international issues. We've learned the hard way that something like a pandemic can fundamentally change our life. We learned a similar thing at 9/11 when terrorists working out of Afghanistan changed our lives and took 3,000 innocent lives in a single day. People your age, John, have to make career decisions. Mm-hmm. Should I go into government? Should I go into the military? Should I join the foreign service? Should I work in this business that tries to export goods overseas? Should I go work for the International Rescue Committee or Doctors Without Borders or some other NGO? Should I become a journalist that focuses on these issues? Should I work now where you're working? Mm-hmm. So my view is, and even issues like investing or business, or just say you're on a automobile assembly line, and some politician goes up and says we need to have tariffs, and that will affect your ability to export the cars you're making. Well, is that good or bad for you? And how are you supposed to make an informed decision? So what I try to do is essentially distill the history I thought you needed to know, what I thought you needed to know about the basic regions of the world. Thirdly, what I thought you needed to know about the issues we've been talking about, all the various aspects of globalization. And last, what I thought you needed to know about how the world worked, and try to put it in a volume. Keep it short, not assume any prior knowledge. Every time I mention something, I try to explain it. Try to avoid jargon, abbreviations, all the other stuff people like me traffic in. And I wanted to make it not only interesting, because I think it is interesting, but accessible. And for all I know, this will be the first book that people read in this subject. For all I know, it will be the last book that they read. And again, what I wanted to do was give them a kind of foundation. So then when they went about their lives as a citizen, in the workplace, what have you, that they would simply have a foundation. They would have a way to make sense of this world. I mean, someone your age, one last point. Think about it. What year were you born?
97.
Okay. So if you live, and we're counting on it, a normal life, your life will almost exactly track the 21st century.
Yeah.
You're coming of age. Here it is. We're just finishing the second decade. Hopefully you'll live to, close to or actually see the end of the 21st century. Okay, well, this is going to fundamentally affect your life. This is going to be your life.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to write was a book for someone, say your age, that would put you in good stead or put you in better stead, give you that foundation. And again, hopefully, as you go through your life, you'll build on it. You'll have, you'll read other things. You'll have all sorts of experiences like the one you're having now. But I thought, again, for starting out, it could help a lot of people. But again, even if you're older, you have to vote this November. And I don't tell people how to vote. I don't tell them what's the quote unquote right answer on any issue. What I try to do is give people tools so they can make better answers for themselves.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And you're right. You don't tell people how to vote or where to vote, but you absolutely have to vote. And Richard, I couldn't agree more. This book is a foundation. It really is. And it's giving me global insights. I graduated undergrad in 2019, and it's funny you mentioned the introduction of your book. You mentioned that there's 3 courses that you were surprised you didn't take: economics, history, and government relations. And I ironically enough took all 3. However, only one was mandatory, and that's because I had a business degree and economics is essential to that. But the other 2 were electives that I was, kind of pushed to take from my parents, because they were saying, listen, you need to get a globalized view. You need to understand the world and how it works. And so, this book is just it's a continuation of that. And or if someone didn't have that, this is something that they could look to for that. And so, there's a line in your book that says, quote, "It's possible to graduate from nearly any 2 or 4 year college or university in the United States without getting even a rudimentary understanding of the world," something that you had just recently mentioned. And so tell us a little bit about why this is so important, particularly now in today's age and time, and what does this say about our education system?
Yeah, just so no one's confused, because you make the right point. Virtually every college and university offers a whole range of courses,
Hmm.
but very, very few schools in the United States require that you take certain courses. Instead, you may have a distribution requirement that says you have to take 2 courses in history or 2 courses in global issues in order to get your degree. But if there's a range of 50 or 100 courses you can choose from, obviously you can choose something that's narrow, that won't necessarily give you anything like the overview or comprehensive overview that you need. And so again, what I try to do, what I set out to do, was provide what that sort of comprehensive A to Z, A to Z, if you prefer, look at the world. And the reason is obvious, that the security of any country, we can talk about the United States, but it doesn't have to be just the United States. The future of it is going to, in large part, depend upon not just what happens internally, but what happens externally. We live in a world where we talked about globalization, where borders are not in many cases barriers. The oceans that surround this country are not moats. We can't pull up the drawbridge. So like it or not, the effects of climate change will reach us. In this case, it was the effects of a virus that broke out in China. 9/11, as I said, it was the effect of terrorists coming from Afghanistan, originally from countries in the Middle East. And what I wanted to do was put people in a position where they could better understand the relationship between their country and the world, understand both, not just the threats, but also the opportunities that the world presents, and also the other way around. Think about what you do, how it affects the world. There's a kind of loop about how foreign policy, what individuals and firms do, how it affects the world, and then vice versa, how what goes on in the world affects individuals, their businesses, their communities, and their country. So I wanted people simply to get more aware and get a better understanding. What I'm trying to discourage is any sense that the world doesn't matter. I think to deny what goes on in the world is dangerous. I think isolationism, to simply try to opt out, is similarly futile. The image that comes to mind is the ostrich putting his head in the sand, and the tide comes in and washes it away. And the other thing, and it's consistent with what you and your organization are up to, it's not just that the world matters, but I don't think for the most part there's unilateral answers to it. These are global challenges, and global challenges call for collective responses. And that's the implicit message of the book. Now, again, we can have, and we should have, debates about the content of those collective responses. What is the smartest policy for dealing with global public health, or with climate change, or with terrorists? What should be the rules that regulate cyberspace? What should we do about a North Korean proliferation challenge? We can go on through all 17 of the SDGs, for example.
Sure.
That's a matter for public debate. What I don't think we can debate is that we can ignore these issues, or that we can solve them better ourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we talked a little bit about it, but we're really living in a different era, in modern times, and currently, more information is being generated daily than ever before, and the internet, for better or worse, has allowed people, no matter their level of knowledge or education, to have a platform to millions of people around the world. And so, what would you tell someone, Richard, navigating a world where accurate information is scarce and misinformation is abundant?
No, it's a real dilemma. We live in a world where we're flooded 24/7, and as you say, there's the internet is essentially a place of unlimited information, but there are no editors, there's no authenticators, there's no one who says this is good, this isn't. But there's a few places we can go to. Certain newspapers obviously have powerful reputations. In this country, it would be what? The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post at a minimum. There's several other regional newspapers that are good. You then have the Financial Times, I think, is an excellent daily newspaper. You have certain magazines, The Economist, for one, which is a really important read. There's certain television shows or certain radio shows which have built up reputations over the years as being serious and balanced and not having a political agenda. The best magazine in the field, I'll brag, on international relations is our own Foreign Affairs. Full disclosure, we publish at the Council on Foreign Relations. So there's places people can go. I also think, though, it's useful sometimes to go to places on the internet that you disagree with, just to be challenged. I think too many people only go to places on the internet that are a bit of an echo chamber, and I force myself at times. So, like in the old days when I used to go to gyms to work out before this, I would spend some of my time watching all different networks. So while I was on the elliptical, I'd spend, say, 10 minutes on Fox and 10 minutes on CNN and 10 minutes on MSNBC. And if truth be told, probably a few minutes on ESPN, but that's different. And just to be exposed to what different people are thinking. That actually, I have a part of in my book called "Where to Go From Here, Where to Go From More," and essentially, it's to answer your question: how do you stay involved? A book like mine is fine as a start, but people need to have regular access to information. But there's nothing better, and I don't care if you read it in paper or online, than one of the quality daily newspapers or something like a weekly magazine like the Economist. If you had to start, I would start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes out to all of our viewers, because that's something that I was questioning when I'm looking through your book is how do I stay on top of these topics and points of discussion? And absolutely, I agree with all those sources. And, it's difficult to navigate this world and Internet of Things, information and everything like that. But it's essential that we not only fact check and continue to do that, not only with, the sources, but with people putting them out, but at the same time to also to look at that opposing side. You're right. You don't want to constantly be driven to think one way and not have an idea of the other. And debate is an essential process of that, to have those discussions. And so moving on here, Richard, you've had an unbelievable and impactful career. I mean, we mentioned some of your past endeavors and things like that. And so for our younger audience, people similar to myself, if you could go back in time, what bit of advice would you give yourself just starting out in your career?
Look, one is not to overplan it. I didn't sit down at any age and say, this is what, here's the trajectory I'm going to take, and then I've got to check these 6 boxes to get there. My view, particularly, well, we'll take it in different stages, John. I'm actually glad you asked for that. When you're on campus, I would simply say study widely. I am an old-fashioned guy who believes in the liberal arts curriculum. Expose yourself. The reason I got into this field in the first place is when I first got to campus, I went to Oberlin College. I asked people who was the best professor on campus, and they said it was this professor of religion, and so forth. And I took the course, and it was fantastic. And that got me interested first in comparative religion. I then got involved in the Middle East, and one thing led to another. I went to the Middle East. I then got involved in international relations. It wasn't by design. It was just where I followed what was interesting, what was intellectually exciting. When I took my early jobs, to me, the most important thing, and it's the biggest piece of advice I could give people, is take the jobs where you learn the most. You want to get stretched. Whether it's how to get better at writing, get better at speaking, at advocacy. You want to be in something, hopefully that matters and excites you. But put yourself in jobs where you get stretched. If you're lucky and you can find a good mentor, someone who will take you under his or her wing and, again, expose you to stuff, show you, give you a chance to get involved, that's great. In my own experience, if you can write well, you're more likely to get those opportunities. When I was a young person in my 20s in the Pentagon, I didn't get invited, shall we say, very frequently to meet the Secretary of Defense or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but my memos could get places. And so there's something to be said for good writing. But I think the best thing as a young person is to try many things. Sometimes finding out what's not right for you is just as important as clicking. I mean, I've said this to my own kids. They're both in their late 20s. And there's always pressure, I think, that young people feel to figure it out, to sort it out. I understand the pressure. But my instincts are to say, be easy on yourself. Relax. Give yourself 5, maybe more jobs in the first 5 or 7 or 8 years of your post-education career, just where you experience different things, you get exposed to different things. And by a process of elimination, you'll say, well, look, this isn't for me, but that was kind of interesting. Or I like working with large numbers of people, or I really like working on my own. I really like stuff that's heavily intellectual. Or no, actually, I really like stuff that's much more operational, filled with doing. I want to be overseas. I want to be in a city. I want to be in the country, what have you. I like structure. I don't like structure. I want to choose a career path. So I want to join something like the military or the foreign service where there's a clear 30-year possibility, or just the opposite, what have you. It doesn't matter. My point is simply to expose yourself and give yourself a break. Again, the only thing that concerns me, and I see it with so many young people who work for me, and we have hundreds who work at the Council on Foreign Relations, is the pressure that they often feel to figure it out, to sort it out, to make the choice. Think about it. If you're in your 20s now, you will probably have what, in the course of your career, maybe 25 separate jobs, maybe 20, maybe 30. I've lost count in my case. This is the first time I've ever held a job for more than 4 years, but you're going to move around a lot. And the reason is, your life, but also technology, the market will change. Certain jobs that exist now won't exist in 25 years, and vice versa. In 25 years, there'll be all sorts of new jobs brought into existence because of changing technologies. So get used to the idea of mobility, and think about also the other thing I'd recommend is, and I know it's hard also sometimes to imagine this, that even though no matter how many degrees you have, your education isn't over. As you go through your career over the next 50 years, as you think about changing jobs, you're going to need to top off your intellectual tank, almost like you would if your gas tank if you were driving across country. So you're going to need moments of education or of retraining to get ready for your next job, because there's no way what you learned in high school or college is going to be sufficient or relevant for what you might want to do in 10, 20, 30, or 40 years.
Richard, I mean, just truly inspirational and motivational words for our younger audience. And absolutely, I couldn't agree more. You have to continue to learn, always strive to learn, and always ask questions and want to learn, have that curiosity. And so speaking to that younger audience, what would be your call to action for them? What would you say is something that they could be doing now, during this global pandemic to better themselves or better society as a whole?
Well, the most important thing I would say is to realize that you should get involved, that there's no substitute for getting in there. You can make a difference. There's nothing inevitable about history. And I've been lucky enough, I've worked for 4 presidents, and I've been in rooms where decisions were made. And you realize if there were different people making those decisions, history would have gone in completely different directions. And the lesson I take from that is, get involved. Where you are now, there might be things you can do in your community. Maybe healthcare workers need help with homeschooling for their kids. There's things you can do now, given that our society is under tremendous pressure. But what you were getting at, John, is also it's a great time to tool up.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about your next step as the economy recovers, maybe now is the time through distance learning to pick up that additional skill, whether it's a language, whether it's some computer skill. Maybe it's simply to get more up to speed about this part of the world or this set of issues. So if you're interested in global public health, look, we're at a moment in history where distance learning is not just possible, it's incredibly good. So it could be a formal course, it could simply be an informal sort of self-education thing, but use the time. I think it's, we're all in this weird life where every day is kind of blending into every other, and there's few boundaries between when you're working and when you're not. And there's a Groundhog Day quality to it. I get it. And all I would say is, introduce some structure into your life and basically say a few hours every day or whatever you can spare or devote. Here's my goal. If this lasts for another 6 months, which it might, or a year or whatever it lasts, at the end of it, I want to have tooled up in a certain area. So be thinking about what interests you or where you're weakest and where you need to build up, if you will. So then you're more employable, you're more ready for whatever it is you want to do next. But again, you can't choose the cards you're dealt. We've been dealt these cards. We're all living a life now that none of us ever imagined in our worst moments. Okay, here we are. So what do we make of it? And again, I would say if you've got the time, and a lot of us now have extra time, we're not commuting. Some of us are, 40 million Americans have lost their work. I would say to vote as many of those hours as you can to tooling yourself up. So it might just be, reading or studying a language, gaining a skill. Also other things personal. Here's a great chance to do the musical or art exploration you always wanted to do. So there's any number of things. Plus, again, our society, our economy are in great need. And I would think that there's real opportunities to make a difference locally.
Yeah, and don't forget to pick up a copy of Richard Haas's book as well. I believe that's probably the best place that our global audience could start. It's available for e-read. I would be remiss not to mention that. And so, Richard, kind of in closing here, if our viewers want to find out more about your work in particular and the work of the council, where can they go?
Well, thank you for asking. For the council, it's cfr.org. It's an extraordinary site, by the way. Let me just sort of say, we curate the best that's written in the field. It's also a large educational dimension. We have something called World 101, and we're putting together an entire curriculum, all these online resources to teach people of the basics of the world, on globalization, on the regions of the world, on the history of the world, and so in many ways, parallel to the things I wrote about in the book. But CFR.org is an extraordinary site for people at any level of the field, from beginners to experts. Also, foreignaffairs.com, the Foreign Affairs website, is remarkable. And what we've done is, we've removed the paywall for anything about the coronavirus. So if you want to read what's going on and get a better understanding of the pandemic and its implications for your country or the world, it is all there. So I think those are extraordinary resources. And by the way, I'd say a lot of other newspapers and magazines have done the same thing, from the New York Times, from the Atlantic, and so forth. They've taken stuff that's normally behind paywalls and made it accessible. So the barriers to staying up on what's going on have come down in many cases.
Well, there you go. CFR and Foreign Affairs, The World, a brief introduction. It sounds like our audience has quite a lot of reading and quite a lot of places to look to get globally informed and involved. Richard Haas, President of the Council on Foreign Relations, we couldn't thank you enough. This morning, your insights were so impactful, and I think will really add a lot of value to our upcoming summit. So thank you so much, Richard. We greatly appreciate your time and participation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. And thanks also to what you and your colleagues are doing. It's great to see so many people so involved in trying to improve the state of this world of ours. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.